Our lives are a collection of moments, both big and small. And when all we can see is a mess, we struggle to find the meaning. But we can look back on our lives and see God at work in every high and every low, as we learn how to connect the dots.
Well, as Claire mentioned, we're in the middle of a series called Connecting the Dots, and Pastor Paul and Pastor Jim have already gone the last 2 weeks, our two senior pastors, and their stories have blessed me immensely. I hope you'll check them out on YouTube if you missed them. And today I get to share mine. And with each person that shares their story, the set changes, and so they've tried to bring my personality to life in a little set, and it would not be me if there was not color and flowers and cinnamon rolls, as you may notice over here. When they were asking, like, what do you want on your set? I was like, well, it really wouldn't be Alison Leamon if there wasn't a donut or a cinnamon roll. So they made my wish come true. But I want to call your attention to one thing. And this is probably one of the most special gifts I have ever been given. And over here is my license into the ministry that I got whenever I was 18 years old. My home church, there was a vetting process, and they affirmed my call to ministry and commissioned me and sent me out. And that was special. But the special part, the gift, comes in the fact that I had lost that certificate. And I had lost it, and my parents found it in my mid-20s, and they found it, and they knew that it was special to me, so they had it framed, and they gave it to me as a surprise on my birthday. And so that is one of the most special gifts that I have received. In part special because, you know, as a good parent who has a student who's in high school aged asking the question, like, do I want to give my life to ministry? They're like, now wait a second, have you considered what it would be like to live on a minister's salary? Have you considered that? And indeed, so that sweet certificate being framed was not only bringing about something that was lost that was special to me, it was also this full circle of just their full support, which I had always had anyways. So that's one of the sweet gifts, and it really feels appropriate today because my parents uniquely know, probably more than anyone, what it's like for me to be standing here today. Because there are reasons that I should not be standing here today. And some of those are more in my head than others, but I want to share with you one of those reasons. And this is actually a huge part of my story. And I'm actually surprised it's taken me this long to share it with you on a Sunday morning in an adult worship setting, but there's been other parts of my story I've been sharing. And some of you guys have heard me talk about the last 8 years, and my husband and I struggle with infertility and 6 miscarriages, and that journey continues. But this is the first part of my story. That's where I'm going to go today, this large part of my story that has directly shaped who I am. But whenever I got to thinking about this story, I realized that since it actually starts with me as a 2-year-old, that I wasn't quite the best person to tell this story. And so my parents, who attend Preston Trail, love me dearly and wanted to worship God by sharing their story today publicly for the first time. So would you take a look at this?
The day I found the knot on Allison's leg, it was in August of '91. I remember August the 10th, and I was getting her ready for a nap, and I found a lump in the back of her leg, and it didn't match her other leg. And we went down to Shands Cancer Center in Gainesville, Florida, and I remember exit 9, getting off and going down, and we took a left, and I saw the sign to the cancer center, and it didn't register at all to me that it was cancer. I just thought we were there to get this knot out, and that the Knoxville doctors felt like it was just better to go there.
We thought it was going to be okay, but as things got worse and it was diagnosed as cancer, things began to weigh on us in terms of what's this mean. I was fairly confident, even after she was diagnosed, that we could get through this. I just remember in that waiting room what turned into hours. When he came back and told what had happened, that the cancer was actually part of the nerve itself, and that it was a very aggressive cancer.
The tumor had actually originated inside her sciatic nerve and spread to a whole hamstring and part of another hamstring muscle. They had to cut it, and then they came out and said she wouldn't walk anymore.
That presented new problems to us. Not only were we worried about her living, her life, what that would mean, plus 2 years of aggressive chemotherapy. What's that mean to a 2-year-old? As a father, you want to protect your daughter. You know, you feel like that you're the person that is there to help her through this process.
We had to go to a nerve surgeon, and so when he did the nerve graft, he didn't want to use donor tissue because her being immunosuppressed from all of her chemo treatments. So he wanted to use all her other leg. There are nerves you can live without. One of her legs had split and provided the extra amount that he needed. And so when she came out and said it was as if I ordered it from a factory, I was like, I knew it was God.
We were very concerned about how is this going to impact her childhood, how is this going to impact her adulthood, how is this going to impact her life. And that's where I think, you know, I give so much credit to Deanna.
You know, I'd ask God to help me with the right words, but I still wasn't happy about it, and I still wasn't thankful for it, because this is my child, and this is forever for her that she has to deal with herself. I couldn't fix it. I can pray. She's the one that has to be tough.
My plan is not necessarily God's plan. And I look at that, connecting the dots going back, okay, but I didn't see it at the time.
And I'll say this, I do know he was there to hold me up. So I couldn't have done it. So he was there.
Would you guys thank my parents for sharing their story? Like my mom said, there's no doubt in my mind today that God was there. No doubt. But it would take me a very long time to get there on my own. So that's the story that I'm sharing with you today. And so my first dot is cancer. And I'm actually going to connect the dots here for you so you can kind of see my story unfold. So that first one is cancer. And then there's a connected dot of a lifelong disability, which I hate that word. But I wear a brace on my leg and have a lift in my shoe, and I don't have all the nerve use or the muscle use in that leg. Now, if you've had cancer, or really any lifelong, this dot that stays with you for the rest of your life, then you know it's a dot you have to keep reinterpreting. You have to keep reprocessing. You have to keep wrapping your head around, and this has been that one for me. But it's made a little more complicated by the fact that I don't remember those years my parents talked about. I don't have memories until I'm about 6. And that's kind of how your brain processes a childhood trauma of that kind. And so I want to share with you what I do remember. So I'm going to pick up the story where my parents left off. And here's what I do remember. So I had just finished chemo, and so you'll see a picture here of Allison at the end of chemo. And then I was headed back to school, and so you'll see that picture of my little pink backpack. And headed into school, right? Walking in on my own 2 legs, which the doctors said I would not do. Thank you very much. And coming in, having battled cancer, a journey that most kids know nothing about, right? With my hair growing in, my legs are 2 different sizes. I have scars up and down the full length of my legs, half the nerve function, half the muscle function in my left leg. And this is how I came in. And so I remember, while I don't remember exact thoughts, I remember just the feeling of feeling different. These early elementary years, they just felt different. I felt like I'd been through a lot, and I felt grateful to be here, but just also like I didn't fit in, like no one else understood what I was walking in with. And so that was not made better by the fact that kids point out what's different. You may have had kids that are in the grocery store and they're sitting there asking a question that you really wish they would ask more quietly, but those kinds of things began to happen. And so my elementary years, I have certain questions I can still remember today of kids asking questions about my brace or my legs, some curious, and some not so kind. Well, this feeling of being different did not go away. In fact, it continued to grow as we continue throughout all of elementary school, as I was in and out for various surgeries. And so you'll see here just different pictures of me over time having different surgeries. And so this feeling of being in and out was just a part, you can see me aging, in and out of my elementary years. And there you can see me grumpy about this one, apparently. And also I got really good at asking for multiple colors on casts, so don't be fooled, you can do more than one color. But this differentness, it was there. I hated PE because I can't walk heel toe. I can't skip. That's one thing I'm going to do in heaven. I hated PE. I hated going to people's houses where you had to take your shoes off, because for me it meant admitting I'm wearing a brace and hearing that Velcro sound come off, and my brace never quite smells perfectly clean because you wear it every day. And it shows my limp every day. And so I just remember these feelings of I can feel it in my body even as I talk, of feeling different. And this is the beginning of what I'm gonna identify as just some deep-seated insecurity. Feeling insecure, feeling not at home in my own body, a dislike of my own body, which led to body image issues, particularly around my legs. Looking back, I realized there was just this deep need to be loved, this deep need to be accepted. And then like that insecurity kind of turned into this people-pleasing. You've heard me talk about that if you've heard me preach before. But I was an obedient kid trying to get love and meaning there, right? Doing all the things right. I was obedient at school. I was the teacher's pet. I'm still friends with some of my teachers on Facebook, right? Like finding love and meaning in grades and teachers. And I grew up in East Tennessee and then Georgia, and so Bible Belt, and so I knew what God wanted of me, so I, got baptized to make sure God liked me too. And I'm sure some of that was genuine, but it was shrouded in this insecurity of just making sure I did what I could that God might like me. Well, fast forward to the middle of my 6th grade year, the middle, which I do not recommend moving across the country, the middle of your 6th grade year, but my dad got a job in Texas. And so we were born and raised in Tennessee, in North Georgia, all very close to family. And here's this news that we're moving to a city called McKinney. And I have to tell you, for our East Tennessee ears, McKinney sounded so hick and Southern to us. Like you should have heard us saying, we're moving to McKinney, Texas. I mean, we just drew it out as long as we could because I was convinced the kids rode horses to school and it was just the middle of nowhere, away from my beloved Smoky Mountains. I wasn't about it. So the story goes that moving day comes, my mom hops in one car to drive, my sister and I get in, my only sister and I get in, and my dad hops in the other car with the dog, because we were mad at him. We were moving across the country. And we begin the 13-hour drive to Texas. We cross the state line. My dad gets pulled over for speeding. And do we stop? No, we don't. We keep on going, and the officer says, "Welcome to Texas, sir." So we make it to Texas begrudgingly. I went to Dowell Middle School, and I came with all of that baggage. All the differentness, all the insecurity, and I didn't know how to process it. It was all below the surface, and so it all just came with me, but now outside of my comfort zone, outside of my stability of the other side of the country. And so that's kind of how I came, and things at this point started to take a turn as I continued to look for love and acceptance, but this time I was a middle schooler. So, I looked for it in the flute and those kinds of ways, but also I started looking for it in boys, which I don't recommend. And these thoughts started that the best word I have for it is just that they were dark thoughts. These thoughts of, God, if you're gonna make me, and you're gonna make me broken, and you're gonna give me these ugly legs, then I just wish I wasn't here. I wish I'd never been born. And maybe it would be better if I wasn't here anymore. And I began to wonder regularly about not being here, because here felt too hard. And I might have different words for those now, but I've always called them my dark thought days, and I'm thankful they didn't progress. But we grew up around church, but that was a Sunday thing. I didn't know how to deal with God the other 6 days a week and all this anger and all this pain. And so I was just so mad at God. Now, thankfully, my friends, they raised a flag and said, hey, she's not okay. And they told one of my middle school teachers, I'm a teacher's pet, so I was absolutely mortified that my teacher knew I had been having these dark thoughts. And so I wanted to kill my friends because I was just livid at them. But this picture-perfect exterior where I'd been trying to convince everyone that I'm okay, trying to convince myself that I'm okay, it was crumbling, and people saw the inside that I wasn't okay, that there was a lot of unprocessed grief, and I needed help. And there were 2 paths before me, and I saw them. I can remember this moment clearly. I felt 2 paths. I can continue down this one path, and I know where that leads, my dark thoughts path. Or I can choose another way. And so thankfully, my parents got involved and they got me involved in counseling. There was a lot of Bluebell ice cream in the mix. There is a 10 for 10 deal that we still joke about, and eating a lot of Bluebell ice cream in those days. But thankfully, by the grace of God, one thing that I tried was just this. I retried church. I'd been around it all my life, right? But I retried it, and I went all in on Sundays, on Wednesdays. I was there after school with our youth minister, and instead of being mad at God and confused over here away from him, I started doing it to his face. And you want to know what I found when I started doubting and questioning and being angry to God to his face? I found Jesus. I found Jesus, a person. I didn't find religion. I'd known about that. I didn't find a checklist of how to make God like me. I'd tried that. I found Jesus. And I found that the very reason I hated my own existence and the reason that I asked about my legs and my body and the things that I hated, Jesus was over there saying, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." And I found that he wasn't just telling me he loved me and that I was made on purpose. He was also willing to die for me. And it blew my mind, my middle school mind that thought about this much of myself, that he, Jesus, a person who is fully God, would die for me, and that all the ways that I've been looking for love in all the wrong places and the sins that I had amassed, he forgave them as far as the east is from the west. I found Jesus. And when I think about what led me to Jesus, I think of this verse in Ephesians that talks about how wide and how long and how high and how deep is the love of Christ. You see, I had been asking questions about God over here, but whenever I actually looked at what he had to say about me, it changed things. You see, whenever I began to receive the magnitude of God's love, I then, and only then, could begin to connect the dots. And so in connecting the dots, I was able to look back for the first time in my life. Takes time, takes some distance sometimes from those dots, you guys. But here's what I saw. On my cancer, I saw, as my mom told you about, that the nerve transplant team went looking for extra nerve because they didn't want to do a nerve donor. That would have been too hard on my body. And what did they find? In my right leg, the good one, that my sciatic had split and they had the textbook amount that they needed. Medical anomaly or miracle? I know which one I think it was. They also found that there was very few doctors who had dealt with this kind of aggressive cancer because it was so fatal, and one of them just happened to be in my hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee, which is not the medical metropolis of the world. Anomaly or miracle? I also found that this cancer rate of survival, I looked it up this week, and right now it has a 30% survival rate. 3 out of 10 people survive, but when I looked it up as a teenager, it was lower in the teens, meaning that things have gotten better since then. And so this cancer, I had maybe a 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 chance of surviving, usually because this cancer is in your brain or your spinal cord, and my cancer was 1 inch below my spinal cord. Anomaly or miracle? Again, you know which one I think it was. Looking back, I was able to see these things for the first time. Looking back on my dark thoughts, I saw community. I saw friends that spoke up for me. I saw a family that was not swayed by the perception of counseling in society, but they got me in. I also look back and I saw a foundation of faith, which, if I'm honest with you guys, this is a new revelation that I've had as I've been reliving my story in the last month. That what I longed to figure out how to talk about God regularly, but I had this foundation so that whenever I hit rock bottom, I knew the church was an option. I had a foundation of faith. And also there were all kinds of answered prayers all throughout my story. You see, I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old in this first part of this story. I wasn't old enough to pray those prayers for myself. But there were men and women, family and friend, that prayed prayer after prayer, and they sought the Lord, and he answered them. I look back on my life and I see that my God was there all along. I look back on my life and I see that he guided those doctors' hands and he saved my life. I look back on my life and I see that he guided my friends to speak up and he saved my life. My God was there, and I believe my God is there for you in the midst of your dark times. And I began to realize that I had been looking in the wrong places. I had been looking over here trying to find love, but I was just stuck in these questions and this doubts, and I was doing it away from God. But when I started looking at what God had to say about me, that's where things changed. And I made a list for you, and I literally made a list in middle school. And I made it for you today, that these are the kinds of things I started memorizing and trying to say to myself, and they're for me, but they're for you. that you are made in God's image. You are loved. You are a child of God. You are worth dying for. You are chosen. You are forgiven. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are never alone. You are God's masterpiece, and you have a future ahead of you. God is not done with you, and he was not done with me. And it was looking at God's love that made me realize I had been looking for love in moving targets. I was looking for love based on the flute or grades or boys. And when you look for love in anywhere else in this world, it will leave you ragged. It will leave you ragged because it's a moving target, because they're gonna always want more, because the measure of success changes. There's always more education or more degree or more success to have, and it's exhausting. But when you look to God, you find just how secure and steadfast his love is for you. He is the great I am. He is, he was, he will be, he is the same. His love for you is the same. Whether you've accepted it, whether you realize it, your love is set. And when we look to God, who is not a moving target, we realize how loved we are. And so at this point in my story, I have a new identity. I'm a follower of Jesus. But I would love to tell you I had a new identity and then things were great and nothing else ever happened in my life, right? But that's not how it works. We gain a new identity, but we have to learn how to live out of that new identity. And so looking back, I've still got some more dots to go, but I just think it's important to point out that it was this very imperfect journey. I was now a follower of Jesus, but I had my old friend group and my old boyfriend and my old thoughts about myself. So here's an example of what that looked like. I'm in 8th grade, and I have a friend who's moving to Indiana. And she's moving to Indiana, so we throw her this big going away party. We pool all of our babysitting money. We have a slushy machine. We have a pool house or a bounce house, and we have a pool party. But here's the problem. I don't want anyone to see my legs. So we devised a plan ahead of time that I would get pushed in the pool in my clothes at the beginning of the night so that I would not be seen in my swimsuit. And so I spent 6 hours in this hot tub and in this pool in my clothes. And then I had some friends who joined me in solidarity, but there's me over there in my clothes for 6 hours. And so I tell you this to tell you that it was just this imperfect progress. It took me until my senior year of high school, right? That was 8th grade, all the way senior year of high school until I wore shorts to school. I wore shorts to school for the very first time, urged on by I had a new friend group at this point, so things had started to get better, but my new friend group and by my new boyfriend, Nick, then boyfriend, now husband. So quick aside, we met whenever we were 15, and that's Nick and I. Just a little throwback, and we met actually when we were in middle school, but I was looking for love in all the wrong places, and he loved Jesus, and so it took some time for our paths to intersect. But when we were 15 at Glen Oaks Park in McKinney, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And I hugged him, because why wouldn't you? I was so excited. And he said, "Thank you for the hug." And I knew I was in for a different kind of boyfriend, a different kind of life, and I was thrilled about it. And we got married and have 2 kids, and I don't have time for that story, but the point being, this imperfect progress of showing my brace, of being comfortable in my own skin. It took me time. And I just think that's so important, because if we're connecting the dots up here, I'm hopefully modeling for you how to connect your dots. And the goal is not to go back and just tie a beautiful bow and everything was happy, hunky-dory, and good, right? Because there are beautiful redemption, God moments in my story that I will claim to the day I die. And there are hard things that I am still unraveling, and so I want to leave room for the mess, for me, and for you. But as I'm doing this imperfect progress of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, I started to realize something, that the story that I had been so ashamed of, that it needed to be told. And I believe that God did not give you a story to keep it to yourself. And I started to believe this for myself. I started to believe this is not my story, it's God's story. It's what he has done in my life. I just get to share it. And so 1 Peter 2:9 became an important verse, is an important verse for me, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that this is how God views the Israelites then and me and you now, that You may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful life. And I believe God called me out of darkness, out of despair, out of a pit, and he put me in light. He placed me there so that I could declare his goodness. And I began to own my story for the first time. I stopped hiding it. I stopped running from it. I stopped only wearing pants. And I started declaring my story. I did that. I was invited to speak at the Relay for Life here in the North Texas area. It's a cancer survivor fundraiser. And I began to speak and share my story. And every time I shared my cancer story, I vowed to share my Jesus story. They were one and the same. I did debate and I did original oratory in school, and I went and competed, and I told all about this story of insecurity, and I told my Jesus story. I went on mission trips and I would tell people my story. I would tell them that I am alive. I am not just physically alive and saved from cancer or my dark thoughts. I am spiritually alive because of him. And I would share my testimony, and I would sing this song. That I'm alive and well, God's Spirit is within me, because he died and rose again. And I sang it, and I sang it, and I sang it until something started welling up inside of me, where I realized I couldn't keep this to myself, that this story that I had been through, that it needed to become something and turn into something new. And so I, at 15 years old, the same age I started dating my boyfriend, I said yes to ministry. I said, God, put me in, that I will give my entire livelihood. I will give it all back to you. Whatever you ask, I will do. Now, I didn't quite picture what he had in mind. I told him at the same time that I got licensed at 18 years old, I told him, I'm not using that license. I'm not marrying anyone or burying anyone. I'm not preaching on a stage. Well, 3 for 3, God's grace wins over my stubbornness, and I'm grateful for that. But that calling to ministry, it began to shape me. Everything in my whole web of my story, it's all intertwined. And that calling to ministry is not the bow at the end, because I told you there's those other dots intertwined as well. So I still struggle with insecurity, whether it's over being young or being a female, especially with social media and the Christian culture wars going on. There are things I still struggle with, but I show you my web and my story, not just so that you can hear my story, because this is only a part of it, to be honest, and it's the 30-minute version. There are other dots I could tell you about. My story continues, but I share with you my web and my story in hopes that you too might look at your story. And I know you know your story, but there's a difference in knowing it and sharing pieces of it, and really sitting down thoughtfully to look at how God has been moving. And I want to encourage you to do that. So I want to give you 3 things from my story and my life that I urged you to take with you. The first is that connecting the dots is the important work of discovering God's loving presence that was there all along. I believe this with every fiber in my being, that whatever darkness, whatever detour, whatever journey, maybe you put yourself in, or maybe you don't know where it came from and you're like, who caused this? Whatever darkness you've been in, I believe that God has been there all along. And I believe it takes us to go back and re-story, to re-see our story through the presence of God's love. And I believe you will find him there. Isaiah 49 talks about God, and he's talking about, they're like a mom. How can a mom forget a baby she's nursing? She can't. And yet some mothers do. But God says, I have engraved you on the palm of my hands, that you, your name, your life, your story is engraved on the Creator's hands. You are not forgotten. Not once in your life has your life been unseen by God. And so I encourage you to connect the dots, that you might discover God's hands that were there all along. And here's the thing, it doesn't take away the questions. It doesn't take away the doubts. At least it has not mine. But it makes his love just becomes bigger, and it becomes enough. And that's what I will testify to. So I encourage you to relook at your story. Number 2, it is very easy to shove the hard dots under the rug. We know this. It's easy to shove those hard dots under there. But when we take the time to reflect on those dots and see how they still impact us, we gain freedom. Because I think that if you were to circle your dots, I believe there are some dots there that are still enslaving you, that our dots are a part of us. My cancer is a part of me. My insecurity is a part of me. But there's a difference in it being a limp that I walk with, metaphorically and literally. But there's a difference in it being a limp and it being something that's enslaving me. And there are some dots in your life that are enslaving you, that you've shoved so far under the rug that you don't dare look at because they're so painful. But if you were to bring them out in the light with God, not just at him, I believe you will find freedom. Scripture says it was for freedom that you were set free, and some of your dots keep you in slavery. But here's the thing, as you look back and you try to pull out some of those hard dots, I also want to be clear and be honest that not everything is going to make sense this side of eternity. I don't think that it's possible for all of us to understand what has been happening in our story. I think we get some clarity, but we're always looking at it with not the full picture. 1 Corinthians talks about this. This is a paraphrased version of the Message. It says, "We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist, but it won't be long. It's when Jesus returns, before the weather starts to clear and the sun shines bright, and we'll see it all then. We'll see it all then as clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly as he knows us. Then the fog will clear. Then the weather will clear, and you will be able to see the fingerprints of the artist and the creator in your life that are currently at work, but we can't see it all right now. So go and reinterpret those hard dots when the ones you can't. Just say, God, your ways are higher than my ways. Your thoughts are higher than my thoughts. That's what I have to do. And it actually is enough. The third and last thing is that I believe that your purpose in life, your purpose, why you're here, what good that you have to do with your life has been shaped by what you've been through. And we see this in some big examples, right? Someone that's had a medical disease or chronic illness and they go become a doctor. Or someone that had a great teacher and they want to go become a teacher. We see this in those big ways, but I believe it's even in the small ways. And if I was to use my story as an example right now, if you've heard me preach before, you may have noticed some common themes. I've talked a lot about how questions and doubts are not harmful to your faith. If you've heard me say that, well, I say it because my questions and my doubts led me to Jesus. If you've heard me talk about the next generation, and she's like, she won't stop talking about the next generation, it's because I found Jesus as a teenager. If you hear me talk about making space for the other, those are the different than you, it's because I have felt my whole life like I'm different, right? There are parts of my story that God can redeem, and I do not believe God causes the hard dots in your life, but I do believe he wants to redeem them. And if we don't give them to him, we never get to see it on the other side as part of our redemptive purpose. Your purpose is being shaped by what you've been through. I believe it. I've seen it in my own life. Susan Maros, a professor at the seminary that I'm at, she says that who we are is being formed by God across a lifetime of experiences. And she says the Spirit is fundamentally present and active, and she goes on to say sometimes we recognize it, sometimes we work against it. There's all those different responses. But she says, my hope is that you will come to identify the fingerprints of the artist in your life. And this is what I want for you, that the dots that you are so afraid of or that have been so painful for you, that when you give them to God, you might just discover purpose. And I don't believe God caused them all, but I do believe that your pain can be turned into purpose. I do believe that your hardship can be turned into testimony. I do believe the places you doubted God can become the places you praise God from. That's my story. That's my song. And I believe it can be true for you, where the enemy wants to take you out with your hard dots. And you better bet he does. There is an enemy, and he's trying to take you out with your hard dots. But there's God, who's greater and who's bigger. And he wants to redeem them. And he wants to turn them into your purpose, but you have to let him. You have to let him. You have to choose to restore your story in the lens of God's love. You have to choose to look at those hard dots you're so scared to pull out. And you have to choose to hand him your pain and trust that he might take your pain and turn it into purpose. You see, I believe you were saved from your sin and for a life of purpose. And this is where I want us to spend our remaining time together today, because here's the thing, it's an honor to share my story with you guys, but if I've spoken, and even if you've loved it, it's nothing if you've not met with God yourself. A Sunday morning is a time for you to encounter God, which first of all is ridiculously cool. But second of all, I want to make sure this is not about me. This is not about my story. If that's what you've heard, I've missed it. But this is about you and God and your story and finding him and wrestling with him and trusting him and doubting him to his face if you dare. This is about you and God. And so that's why we have communion here today, because it's so important to me that finding Jesus changed my everything. And so we have to start with him. You were saved from your sin. And the only reason, listen to me, the only reason we are able to do a series like this, connecting the dots and having those beautiful art displays out in the hallway where we're connecting our dots, the only reason we are able to connect our dots is because of Jesus Christ. It is the only reason. If we were to connect our dots outside the perspective of a God who loved us to the point of when we stepped out in unfaithfulness, he was still faithful and he made a way through Jesus Christ, and he's coming back to fully redeem all things. He has been faithful. We are the ones who have not been faithful. It is because of that we can connect our dots. And so if we rush too quickly to our purpose, to the good God can do, we have missed it. And if you've said yes to Jesus, then Jesus is a dot on your story. But sometimes we don't look at it long enough. So today, I want us to look together. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11, "For I received from the Lord what I passed on to you. The Lord, on the night that he was betrayed, took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body. Do this in remembrance of me.' And I want you to take this cracker that I'm struggling to open on my own. There we go. I want you to take this cracker and consider that Christ allowed his body to be broken that you might live. Take and eat." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this, and whenever you drink it, do it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And communion is something that is done throughout all denominations, throughout all tribes and all tongues. Especially today on Sunday, we are gathered with our brothers and sisters all across the world. We unite all denominations, all skin colors, all backgrounds. We reunite around this to remember Jesus' death, but not just his death, right? His death and his resurrection, his ability to bring about life where there was none. So we remember that we are saved from our sins, and it is a great act of love. So let us remember in this way. Praise God that you were indeed saved from your sin. And you were also saved for a purpose. For a purpose, a unique purpose in this place and time. And so I've invited Chelsea and Warren to come help me with that 90s worship song I started earlier, that I'm alive and well. I know you've been wanting to sing it ever since. But here's the thing, you guys. I sang it because I realized so clearly how alive I was. But I believe the same is true for you, every single one of you. Because here's what I believe. I may not know why I survived cancer and others have not. But I do know, because of my experience, because I survived, I know that if you draw breath, if you are alive, if you walked in this room or you're watching online, you are here for a purpose. And you have a purpose, and it's not your reputation, it's not your job or your career or the letters behind your name, it is for him. It is for kingdom good. And so as you sing this song that was so meaningful to me, that I'm alive and well, I want you to consider the fact that you are alive, and you are alive to live for him. Would you stand and would you sing this special song?
I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. I'm accepted. You were condemned. I'm alive and well. Your spirit is within me.
God, today I share my story to honor you. And God, everyone in this room and in my hearing has a story. And God, I pray that that story brings them to a place of honoring you. God, I pray that you would open their eyes as they reflect back over their story. And I pray that they do spend that time. But God, I pray as they look back that they see there was not a pit you were not in. There was not a detour you were not on. There is not a moment that you were not there. And I pray that they would just simply turn their face and realize you've been there all along. You never left them. You never forsake them. You never stopped wanting to redeem their pain. May we just turn and see it. May we just turn and embrace the embrace that you already have for us. We've just not been looking. We've been holding our doubts and our questions far from you, but God, we bring them to you. We bring them to you knowing you meet us there, knowing you are good and you love us with an everlasting, steadfast love. There is nothing we can do to remove your love from us. And God, I praise you for that. It's why we are all here in Jesus' name. Amen.